Silas had learned long ago that ancient ships were the worst liars in the galaxy. New vessels failed loudly. Alarms, flashing diagnostics, polite warnings before something exploded. Old ones failed quietly with dignity and usually waited until you were leaning into a panel to make a philosophical point about arrogance. That was why he trusted nothing that called itself ceremonial. Ceremonial meant nobody had touched it in centuries, and everyone assumed it still worked because tradition said it should. He floated in the command chamber of the Thessian royal vessel, with his boots magnet-locked to a deck older than most governments, muttering to himself as his tools hovered obediently nearby. The ship smelled faintly of ionized air and something floral, like a garden that had been offended and never forgiven anyone for it. The chamber was far too large for a single mechanic, which Silas took personally. Thessians loved space the way humans loved corridors, dramatically and with unnecessary symbolism. Gold-veined conduits traced the walls in elegant curves, pulsing so faintly they were almost imaginary. The command core sat at the center like a patient throne, its surface smooth and dark, waiting. Silas had been told very clearly not to touch it. He had also been told less clearly, but with more paperwork, to test all peripheral systems for anomalous activation. He interpreted this in the traditional engineer sense, which meant touching everything that didn't actively bite him. Captain Vaisha watched from the perimeter with 6 armored soldiers arranged in what they probably thought was a casual stance. Silas recognized the formation anyway. Casual on Thessians meant, we can kill you without standing up straight. Vaisha herself stood with her hands behind her back, posture immaculate, long ears angled slightly back in what Silas guessed was professional patience. Her expression was calm, controlled, and carried the faint tension of someone supervising a human near priceless things. He gave her a thumbs up that she did not return. Routine diagnostic, he said, mostly to hear a human voice in the room. In and out, no heresy, probably. The command core did not respond when he brushed his scanner across it. That annoyed him. He frowned, tapped the scanner once, then twice, because sometimes machines respected persistence. Don't worry, he added quietly to the ship. I'm not royalty. I'm just here to make sure you don't explode during parades. The moment his bare hand made contact, the universe reconsidered its choices. Light surged through the conduits, bright and immediate, cascading across the chamber like a held breath finally released. Symbols rose from the command core, rearranging themselves with unmistakable purpose. The deck vibrated, not violently but deeply, like something ancient stretching after a very long sleep. Silas yelped because courage was optional, but surprise was not, and tried to pull his hand back. The core did not let him. A voice filled the chamber, layered and resonant, speaking Thessian high cant, in a tone that suggested it had never once been ignored. Authorization acknowledged. Royal interface confirmed. The soldiers froze, not metaphorically. Their armor locked, internal systems halting mid-response as ancient protocols seized control. Vaisha's composure cracked just enough to be visible, her ears snapping upright as her eyes fixed on Silas's hand, fused to the command core. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The ship hummed, pleased with itself. Silas laughed. It came out thin and a little hysterical. Okay, he said. That's new. The voice continued, listing subsystems as they awakened, each one responding eagerly. Navigation, defensive matrices, ceremonial lighting, which Silas noted was wildly impractical but impressive. He twisted his wrist experimentally, and the holographic interface followed, obedient and intimate. It felt wrong in the way a borrowed jacket felt wrong. Too familiar, shaped for someone else. Shut it down, Vaisha said, sharp now, command bleeding through restraint. I would love to, Silas replied, deeply, emotionally. I just don't know how yet. The ship, apparently offended by the suggestion, tightened its hold. Royal presence verified. Lineage integrity within acceptable variance. Welcome home. Silas stared at the words hovering in front of him. I think your system might be drunk, he told the air. I rent my apartment. I don't even own a decent chair. Behind him, one of the soldiers made a strained noise, like someone trying to argue with their own armor. Vaisha stepped forward despite protocol, eyes never leaving Silas. Human, she said carefully. Royal DNA locks do not make mistakes. Silas swallowed. That's comforting, he said. For you, less so for me. The ship's lights softened, almost affectionate, as if it had found something it hadn't realized it was missing. Outside the chamber, systems long dormant began to sing back to life, echoing through hull and history alike. Silas finally felt the core release him, leaving his hand tingling and his future abruptly complicated. He looked at Vayshaw, then at the frozen soldiers, then back at the throne-like machine that now seemed content. So, he said, attempting a smile, is this the part where I apologize or the part where someone explains why a mechanic just activated your monarchy? Silence followed his question in the way only military silence could. Heavy, judgmental, and clearly considering violence as a reasonable conversational response. The ancient ship, meanwhile, hummed with quiet satisfaction, lights steady now, as if it had accomplished something deeply personal and was waiting for praise. Silas resisted the urge to pat the command corps like a loyal animal. He suspected that would end badly. Captain Vaysha recovered first. Thessian training was famous for producing officers who could regain composure after witnessing events that rewrote reality. Her soldiers remained locked in place, eyes tracking Silas with the strained intensity of people whose bodies had betrayed them. Vaysha gestured sharply, and a ripple of counter-commands pulsed through the chamber. One by one, the soldiers' armor released, servos unlocking with irritated clicks. They did not relax. "Step away from the core," she ordered. Silas raised both hands slowly, palms out. "Already done. It let go first, which for the record I don't love. Machines that make decisions like that usually want something later." The ship dimmed slightly as if embarrassed. Vaysha studied him for a long moment, her long ears angled back in a posture that was no longer just professional. Curiosity had crept in, unwelcome and persistent. "You will remain here," she said. "You will touch nothing else." "I can do that," Silas replied. "I excel at standing around while other people panic." She ignored the comment and activated her wrist console. Data spilled into the air between them. Genetic readouts, activation logs, ancient seals unraveling themselves as if relieved to finally be read. Silas recognized enough of the structure to know it wasn't improvising. The ship had run confirmation loops older than recorded Thessian history. Whatever mistake this was, it was being very thorough about it. A technician was summoned. Then another. They arrived quickly, whispering to one another in tight, alarmed tones, stopping short when they saw Silas standing unrestrained near the command core. One of them stared openly. "He's human," she said, as if accusing Silas of poor manners. "I've been told," Silas said. "Frequently." They circled the data like scavengers, afraid the corpse might stand up. Every check returned the same conclusion, stubborn and unmoved. Authorization valid. Genetic markers present. Royal lineage detected within permissible degradation thresholds. The words degradation thresholds felt uncomfortably personal. "This isn't possible," one technician murmured. Silas leaned over to read the floating glyphs. "If it helps, I also think that. I once failed a blood compatibility test for donating to my cousin." Vaysha shot him a look sharp enough to slice steel. "You will not joke about this." "I joke when I'm terrified," Silas said mildly. "It's either that or screaming, and screaming tends to escalate things." That unexpectedly earned him a brief pause instead of a reprimand. Security arrived next, armed and tense, followed by an official Silas recognized as someone whose job involved declaring things classified. The chamber grew crowded, thick with suspicion. Silas stood at the center of it all, hands still raised slightly, as if the universe might accuse him of something else at any moment. They tried to replicate the activation. A Thessian noble placed her hand on the core. Nothing happened. Another tried, then another. The ship remained stubbornly inert, as though sulking. Silas was asked, politely, then less so, to approach again. When his fingers brushed the surface, the interface bloomed instantly, lights responding like trained animals. "Well," Silas said, "that feels targeted." Vaysha exhaled slowly. "Enough. Power it down." The ship complied reluctantly this time, systems dimming one by one until only the faint pulse of standby energy remained. The chamber felt suddenly colder, emptier. Silas became acutely aware of how small he was inside it. He was escorted, not dragged, which he appreciated, to a containment suite that looked suspiciously like a comfortable interrogation room. The walls were smooth, softly lit, and very definitely reinforced. Vaishya remained with him while the others dispersed to argue somewhere louder. "You understand," she said, standing opposite him, "that what occurred cannot be concealed." "I'd be offended if you tried," Silas replied. "Hard to hide an ancient ship having an identity crisis." Her gaze sharpened. "Royal DNA locks are absolute. They do not adapt. They do not guess. If they responded to you, then you carry what they require." Silas sank onto the bench, suddenly tired. "My grandmother used to say our family had bad luck with secrets. Guess she was right." Vaishya tilted her head slightly. "Explain." He hesitated, then shrugged. "She worked off-world, research contracts. She never said much about it except that she'd seen things that made politics look small. She hated Thessian news broadcasts, said they lied beautifully." That earned him a flicker of surprise. "And your parents?" "Never knew my grandfather. My mother didn't ask questions. Humans are very good at surviving by not asking questions." Vaishya studied him as if recalibrating an internal model. "If what you imply is true, then you are not an error. You are a remnant." Silas snorted softly. "I've been called worse." The door chimed. Orders had arrived, heavy with implication. Silas was not under arrest. Not exactly. He was not free either. He was, according to the phrasing, temporarily indispensable. He looked up at Vaishya. "That sounds expensive." Her mouth twitched despite herself. "It sounds dangerous." Silas leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "I just wanted to fix a ship," he said. "I didn't mean to activate anyone's destiny." Somewhere deep within the vessel, ancient systems listened, quietly amused. The containment suite proved over time to be less about containment and more about observation. Silas figured that out when the walls subtly shifted texture every few hours, as if the room itself were stretching to stay awake. Someone, somewhere, was very invested in how he reacted to boredom. He tried to disappoint them by being aggressively ordinary. He paced. He napped. He took apart a meal dispenser with permission, put it back together without permission, and left it working better than before. The room rewarded him by not alarming anyone, which he took as a sign of mutual respect. Vaishya visited him between meetings, which Silas assumed were long and unpleasant, because she returned with the particular calm of someone who had spent hours preventing other people from shouting. She brought data slates, questions, and once, inexplicably, a cup of Thessian tea that smelled like heated minerals and regret. "They're pulling records older than my ship," Silas said, eyeing the slate she set down. "That feels flattering and threatening in equal measure." "They are pulling records they swore did not exist," Vaishya replied. "That is worse." She activated the slate. Holographic documents unfolded into the air, dense and precise. Genetic mapping charts, interspecies research proposals, stamped with seals that had been retired, denied, and quietly resurrected. Silas leaned forward despite himself. He recognized the style, old human consortium, formatting layered awkwardly with Thessian script, the kind of compromise design that suggested cooperation without trust. "That's her," he said, pointing. "My grandmother. She always hated photos." Vaishya followed his finger. The woman in the record looked stern, tired, and stubborn in a way Silas felt in his bones. The file was marked with a designation that translated loosely to Crossline Viability Initiative, followed by a date that made Silas's stomach tighten. "This program predates open contact," Vaishya said. "Its existence alone would have caused a political schism. So naturally they tried it in secret," Silas said. "Humans love a good forbidden experiment." "So do Thessians," Vaishya replied. "We simply pretend otherwise." The documents unfolded further. Volunteers, controlled exposure, genetic compatibility studies that read like poetry, written by scientists who desperately wanted to be right. Then the gaps, entire years redacted, names erased, outcomes labeled inconclusive with aggressive confidence. "They shut it down," Silas murmured. "They buried it," Vaishya corrected, "but not before unintended results." Silas leaned back, rubbing his face. "She never said a word. Just warned me not to trust anything that claimed purity." Vaishya's ears angled slightly, a subtle sign of discomfort. Purity is a dangerous myth, she said quietly, especially when technology believes in it. As if summoned by the thought, the ship's internal systems chimed softly, projecting a partial genealogical tree into the room. Lines branched, faded, reconnected. One thin strand glowed steadily, stubbornly present. Silas recognized his own identifier at the end of it. That's unsettling, he said. I don't even know my great-grandparents' names. The ship does, Vaisha replied. It always has. Teams attempted deeper analysis. Blood samples were taken, retaken, and cross-verified until Silas began to feel like a very specific spreadsheet. Each test confirmed the same quiet truth. The royal markers were distant, diluted by generations, but undeniably Thessian. Not enough to grant status. Enough to unlock systems no one else could touch. One scientist stared at the results for a long time before turning to Silas. You are statistically improbable. Silas smiled. My mother always said that. Not everyone found it amusing. Rumors spread faster than official reports. Silas heard raised voices through the walls, words like contamination and precedent slipping through despite sound dampeners. One faction wanted him erased from the record. Another wanted him studied until there was nothing left but data. A third wanted him paraded carefully as proof of progress. Silas wanted a sandwich. Vaisha became his constant escort, partly by order, partly by choice. She walked him through secure corridors while debates raged elsewhere, explaining things he should probably have learned earlier. The Queen must be informed, she said as they paused near a viewport overlooking the docking ring. But timing matters. Context matters. Does she enjoy surprises? Silas asked. No. Do any queens? She considered it. Only in stories. They watched smaller ships glide past, their lights tracing slow arcs through the darkness. Silas pressed his forehead lightly against the glass. If I had known my grandmother was rewriting interstellar law, I would have visited more. Vaisha studied him. You are not reacting as expected. I'm reacting exactly as expected, Silas said. I'm human. This is how we process existential revelations. First denial, then humor, then mild panic, then snacks. A faint curve touched her mouth. It vanished quickly, but Silas noticed. That night, if the ship's artificial cycle could be called night, the royal vessel experienced a systems fluctuation. Not a failure, a recognition pulse. Silas felt it before anyone told him, a strange sensation, like standing too close to a familiar voice. The ship wanted him again. Security alarms did not sound. Instead, the command core activated a limited interface, projecting a single phrase into the chamber. Lineage acknowledged. Continuity viable. Silas stared at it. You don't know me, he said quietly. The ship responded with silence that felt thoughtful. By morning, the decision was made. They would take Silas to Thessian space, to the Queen herself, not as a prisoner, not as a guest, as a problem that refused to stay hypothetical. Vaisha informed him personally. You will be under my protection, she said. That is not a promise I make lightly. Silas nodded. Good. I was worried I'd have to protect myself, and I'm terrible at politics. She hesitated, then added, You may destabilize centuries of tradition. Silas sighed. I really need to stop touching things. The first attempt to turn Silas into an asset happened before they even left the dock, which Silas considered impressively efficient. He was halfway through arguing with a cargo drone about personal space when a delegation arrived unannounced, dressed in the careful neutrality of people who never touched tools or weapons, but expected both to move for them. They smiled the way contracts smiled, all sharp edges hidden behind polite language. We believe, said the tallest among them, that your condition can be managed. Silas blinked. I usually manage my conditions with sleep and bad decisions. Vaisha stepped between them with the fluid grace of someone who had ended negotiations by other means. He is under my protection, she said, tone even. State your purpose. The delegation adjusted, recalculated. We offer safety, another said. Influence, compensation. You need not involve the throne. Silas leaned around Vaisha. Is this the part where you tell me how much I'm worth? Vaisha did not move. Leave. They did reluctantly. their smiles stiffening as they went. Silas watched them disappear down the corridor. "So," he said, "that's one side." "There are others," Vaisha replied. "Less polite." They found those others 2 decks later, when a maintenance shaft malfunctioned in a way that was too deliberate to be accidental. Bulkheads sealed. Lights flickered. Silas felt the now familiar tug in his chest as the ship's ancient system stirred, confused by conflicting commands. He raised his hands instinctively. "I didn't touch anything," he said. "I swear." "I know," Vaisha replied, already issuing counter orders. "They are testing boundaries." The ship responded to Silas anyway, rerouting power with elegant defiance. The bulkheads slid open. Somewhere someone cursed. Silas exhaled. "I hate being useful." Word spread quickly after that. By the time they departed, Silas had been offered protection, exile, employment, erasure, and once, disturbingly, a commemorative plaque. He declined all of it, mostly because none of the offers included a clause for going back to being a mechanic. The journey toward Thessian space was quieter, but not calmer. Silas spent hours in the engine bays, partly because they felt honest, and partly because the ship seemed to relax when he was nearby. Vaisha observed him from a distance at first, then closer, asking questions that were technical on the surface and philosophical underneath. "You do not resent this," she said one cycle, watching him coax a stubborn conduit into cooperation. "I resent that it's inconvenient," Silas said. "Resentment requires intent. I didn't choose this." "Choice is often a luxury," Vaisha replied. "Then I'd like a refund." She almost smiled. Threats escalated as they crossed into contested lanes. Messages arrived encoded and anonymous, promising consequences or salvation, depending on which faction had sent them. One suggested Silas publicly renounce any connection to Thessian heritage. Another suggested he lean into it for the good of stability. Silas forwarded them all to Vaisha with brief notes like, "No thanks," and "Absolutely not." "Your refusal complicates matters," she said. "I've been told I have that effect." The ship itself became a point of contention. It deferred to Silas in subtle ways, adjusting gravity a fraction when he stumbled, opening doors a second early. Once, when a security officer tried to block his path without authorization, the deck hummed in warning until the officer reconsidered their life choices. Silas winced. "I really don't want it doing that." "It recognizes you," Vaisha said. "Recognition is not loyalty." "That's comforting," he muttered. "I think." Midway through the journey, an attempt was made on his life. It was subtle, efficient, and would have worked on anyone else. The food dispenser miscalibrated a nutrient compound into something lethal. Silas noticed only because the machine hesitated before dispensing, a tiny pause that felt wrong. "Don't," he said softly to the unit. It obeyed. Security swarmed moments later. Investigations followed. Accusations flew. Silas sat on the floor of the galley, legs crossed, staring at the dispenser. "I didn't know ships could develop opinions," he said. "They do not," Vaisha replied. "But this one remembers." After that, the Queen's summons arrived. Formal, absolute, unavoidable. The court wanted answers. Traditionalists wanted closure. Reformists wanted proof. Silas wanted a quiet corner and a wrench. As Thessian space unfolded before them, luminous and precise, Silas felt the weight of it settle. "I'm not a bridge," he said to Vaisha quietly. "I'm a person." She met his gaze. "That is why this matters." The ship adjusted its course, steady and sure, carrying a mechanic who never wanted power and a captain who knew exactly how dangerous honesty could be. Somewhere ahead, a queen waited, and behind them, factions sharpened their arguments. Silas rubbed his hands together, then stopped, glancing at the nearest console. "I'm going to keep my hands in my pockets," he said, "for everyone's sake." The ship hummed, amused, and continued forward. By the 5th day of travel, Silas had learned 3 important things. First, Thessian ships listened, even when you pretended they weren't. Second, politics traveled faster than light when motivated by fear. Third, destiny was deeply offended by pockets, because keeping his hands in them only made the ship respond in other ways. It started with doors. They opened when he approached, even if they were set to remain sealed. Not dramatically, No fanfare, no lights, but with the quiet politeness of a host anticipating a guest. Silas stopped testing it after the fourth quarter and began apologizing instead. Sorry, he muttered to a bulkhead. Habit. Vaisha watched this with narrowed eyes, arms folded behind her back. You speak to it as if it were alive. I speak to everything, Silas said. Machines, walls, stubborn bolts. Sometimes they listen. Sometimes they don't explode. It's a system. The ship's lights brightened a fraction, smug. They were no longer merely traveling toward Thessian space. They were being watched from it. Long-range sensors picked up tracking signatures that pretended to be navigation errors. Silent drones adjusted their distance whenever the royal vessel altered course. Silas pretended not to notice, which was easier than pretending not to care. The first open confrontation came disguised as assistance. A patrol vessel matched their velocity, requesting diplomatic exchange. Vaisha refused without hesitation. The request repeated, this time carrying a priority cipher tied to one of the oldest noble houses. Silas leaned over her console, peering at the transmission. They sound friendly, he said. Too friendly? Yes, Vaisha replied. That is how you know they are dangerous. The patrol drifted closer anyway. Power readings spiked, not weapons. Interference fields, the kind designed to disable without leaving marks. Silas felt the ship tense around him, systems whispering in frequencies just below conscious hearing. No, he said quietly. The ship rerouted power. The interference collapsed, folded in on itself like an embarrassed thought. The patrol vessel reeled, alarms flaring visibly through the viewport. Silas closed his eyes. I didn't touch anything, he said quickly. You did not need to, Vaisha replied. It anticipated. That's worse. The patrol withdrew. Messages followed, accusatory, then conciliatory, then silent. Vaisha logged the encounter without comment. Silas sat heavily on a nearby crate, rubbing his face. I don't want to be a weapon, he said. You are not, Vaisha replied. You are leverage. That distinction matters. It really doesn't, he muttered. Later, alone in the engine bay, Silas felt the pull again. The ship wasn't calling him to command. Not exactly. It was checking, verifying continuity. He rested his palm against a warm conduit, feeling the vibration steady beneath his skin. You don't get to decide my life, he told it. The vibration shifted, softened. That's not agreement, he added. That's just me saying it out loud. In response, a hidden panel slid open, revealing diagnostic data he'd been trying to access since day one. Silas stared, then laughed despite himself. Bribery, that's how you do it. The humor didn't last. An encrypted message slipped through all filters, appearing only on Silas's personal slate. No signature, no routing data. Just text. We can keep you safe. From them. From the Queen. Silas showed it to Vaisha without comment. Her ears angled back sharply. They are escalating. Can we not escalate back? Silas asked. I'm very bad at escalation. I once apologized to a vending machine. Vaisha almost smiled. Almost. The next attempt was not subtle. A Thessian traditionalist cell launched a boarding craft under stealth masking, aiming not for destruction, but extraction. Silas was in the mid-deck corridor when gravity hiccuped violently, throwing him against the wall. Ow, he said, sliding down. Okay, now I'm upset. Vaisha's voice snapped through the comm. Stay where you are. I wasn't planning on running, Silas replied. The floor disagrees with me. The ship reacted before either of them finished speaking. Defensive fields flared. Not lethal, but absolute. The boarding craft slammed against invisible resistance, stuck like an insect in amber. Silas felt the now familiar pressure behind his eyes. The sensation of recognition turned outward. No, he said again, louder. Don't hurt them. The fields tightened, immobilizing instead of crushing. The message was clear. You may threaten him. You may not take him. Security secured the craft. Arrests followed. The incident would echo through every faction within the hour. Afterwards, Silas sat with his back against the corridor wall, breathing slowly. Vaisha stood guard, silent. I never wanted this, he said finally. I know, she replied. That makes it worse, right? Yes. They reached Thessian space the following cycle. The stars shifted, constellations rearranging into precise geometries that spoke of control and intention. Silas stared out the viewport, feeling smaller with every kilometer. Everyone's going to see me as a symbol, he said, or a mistake. Vaisha turned to face him fully. I see you as a complication, she said, one I intend to keep alive. Silas smiled weakly. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me all week. Ahead, the royal capital shimmered into view, vast, luminous, waiting. Somewhere within it, Queen Ashira prepared to meet the mechanic who could wake her ancestors' ships. Silas flexed his fingers, then deliberately clasped his hands behind his back. Just so you know, he said, if I accidentally change the future, I'm blaming my grandmother. The ship hummed in agreement and carried them onward. The throne chamber did not intimidate Silas the way it clearly intended to. It was vast, precise, and layered with technology so old it had circled back into elegance. Light flowed instead of shone, refracting through translucent panels that adjusted themselves with quiet intelligence. The air itself felt curated, filtered to a balance of scents and ions that suggested someone had once argued about comfort versus symbolism and compromised by making both expensive. Silas stood very still in the center of it, hands clasped firmly behind his back like a man attending his own trial while pretending it was a meeting. Vaisha stood half a step behind him, posture perfect, presence solid. He took comfort in that. If he was going to destabilize an empire, it helped to have someone nearby who knew which end of the room was sharp. Queen Ashira regarded him from the elevated dais, unmoving. She looked at first glance like a human woman sculpted by patience rather than time. Only her long ears, angled elegantly back and adorned with thin bands of light, marked her as Thessian beyond any doubt. Her eyes were steady, analytical, and deeply unimpressed by destiny. So, she said at last, voice calm and resonant, you are the mechanic. Silas nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. I fix things that shouldn't still be working. That is an unfortunate qualification, Ashira replied. My ancestors specialized in things that refused to stop. A ripple of restrained amusement passed through the court. Silas felt his shoulders drop a fraction. Humor, even dry and dangerous, was a relief. Bring the data, Ashira said. The chamber responded immediately, holograms blooming into existence around Silas. Genetic trees, activation logs, historical records, long-thought ceremonial fiction. He watched his life reduce itself to lines and probabilities, branching into places he'd never been. You understand, Ashira continued, that royal interfaces respond to lineage, not intention. I've gathered that, Silas said. I tried explaining my intentions to the ship. It didn't care. That is consistent. Tests followed. Not invasive, but thorough. Silas placed his hand on replicated control surfaces, activated dormant systems, even coaxed a relic drone back to life with an annoyed mutter and a gentle tap. Each time, the technology responded with unmistakable recognition. Ashira watched everything without comment. When it was done, she dismissed the court with a single gesture. Silence settled, heavier now without witnesses. You do not want what this implies, she said. Silas met her gaze. No, Your Majesty, I really don't. That makes you dangerous, she replied. Ambition is predictable. Reluctance is not. He considered that. I just want to go back to my life. Unfortunately, my life seems to have upgraded without asking. Ashira's lips curved slightly. You carry royal markers diluted beyond political usefulness, she said. But technology does not care about politics. It cares about continuity. That word keeps coming up, Silas said. It sounds expensive. It is, she replied. In blood, usually. Vaisha shifted subtly, tension tightening her stance. Ashira noticed. Everything noticed in that room. You have become a point of convergence, the Queen continued. Traditionalists will call you contamination. Reformists will call you proof. Neither will see you. Silas exhaled slowly. I get that a lot. Ashira descended from the dais, each step measured. She stopped an arm's length from him, studying his face as if searching for something she did not entirely expect to find. You are not Thessian, she said. No, Silas agreed. I can't even pronounce half your city names. And yet, she said, our oldest vessels answer you. Silas shrugged helplessly. I'm very polite to machines. For a moment, just one, the Queen laughed. It was brief, surprised, and utterly human. Then it vanished, folded back into composure. I will not name you heir, Ashira said. Silas relaxed so visibly that Vaishya nearly sighed in relief. But I will not erase you either, the Queen continued. You will be designated a sanctioned royal interface, a living key. You will operate under my authority and protection. Silas blinked. That sounds permanent. It is, Ashira said. So is survival. And if I say no, Ashira met his gaze evenly, then others will say yes on your behalf, louder, with weapons. Silas considered his options, then nodded. All right, he said, but I have conditions. Vaishya's head snapped toward him. Ashira raised an eyebrow. You negotiate with a queen? I negotiate with broken reactors, Silas said. This feels similar. He took a breath. No crowns, no titles people can fight over. And if I'm going to be a bridge, I get to decide how much weight I carry. The chamber held its breath. Then Ashira inclined her head. Agreed. Silas let out a shaky laugh. My grandmother would have loved this. Your grandmother, Ashira said quietly, changed history without permission. So have you. As they left the chamber, Vaishya fell into step beside him. You were reckless, she said. Silas smiled faintly. I warned you. Outside, the ancient royal vessel waited. Systems calm, purpose satisfied for now. Silas glanced back once at the closed doors of the throne chamber. Just so we're clear, he said to no one in particular, I'm still keeping my hands in my pockets. The ship, somewhere deep in its core, hummed its approval. Silas learned over the following weeks that becoming a sanctioned royal interface did not come with a uniform, a throne, or even a particularly impressive badge. What it came with was meetings. So many meetings. Some were held in chambers carved from light and history, others in utilitarian rooms that smelled faintly of recycled air and impatience. In all of them, people spoke about him as if he were a system upgrade, rather than a person who still occasionally forgot where he put his tools. The good news was that no one tried to kill him anymore. The bad news was that everyone tried to use him. Silas handled it the only way he knew how, by being relentlessly, inconveniently human. He asked questions no one wanted to answer. He refused to use ceremonial language, insisting that if a ship required 3 metaphors to explain its function, it probably needed maintenance. When traditionalists demanded limits on his access, he agreed immediately, and then suggested limits on their access to anything he fixed. That argument ended surprisingly quickly. Vaishya remained at his side, officially as his security liaison, unofficially as the person who made sure he ate actual meals instead of nutrient paste and didn't wander into restricted zones out of curiosity. Their conversations grew easier, less guarded. She still corrected his posture in formal settings. He still corrected her assumptions about what humans considered normal behavior. You are adapting, she told him one evening, as they watched the royal vessel undergo recalibration, its systems responding smoothly to his presence without surging or flaring. I'm coping, Silas replied. Adaptation implies planning. The ship no longer pulled at him constantly. After Ashira's decree, something fundamental had shifted. Recognition remained, but the urgency was gone, like a problem finally acknowledged instead of ignored. Silas could approach the command core without triggering awakenings. It responded when asked, not when anxious. That's new, he murmured, resting his palm briefly against the cool surface. Good boundaries. I like that. The ship's systems stabilized across the fleet. Other ancient vessels responded indirectly, their diagnostics clearing, dormant protocols aligning without activation. Silas never touched them. He didn't need to. Whatever continuity the technology had sought, it seemed satisfied knowing he existed. Reports filtered in from both Thessian and human space. Joint research initiatives were proposed, openly this time, painfully transparent. The old secret program was exposed, its architects long dead, its intentions debated without resolution. Silas read everything, then filed it away with a quiet sense of distance. His grandmother's past no longer felt like a trapdoor beneath him. It felt like a foundation he could finally see. Queen Ashira summoned him once more, not to the throne chamber, but to a private observatory overlooking the capital. Stars stretched wide beyond the glass, orderly and indifferent. "You have not disappointed me," she said. Silas rubbed the back of his neck. "I set a low bar." "You complicated expectations," she replied. "That is more valuable." She offered him a choice then, quietly. Continued service at court, advisory status with limits, or departure, with protection guaranteed and his designation remaining in effect only when needed. Silas didn't answer immediately. He looked out at the stars, then down at the city, at a civilization built on tradition learning, slowly to bend. "I think," he said, "I'd like to fix ships again. Just fewer surprises." Ashira nodded. "You have already altered the course of our history. You need not remain to watch it unfold." When he left the capital, it wasn't in secret or ceremony, just a transport, a toolbox, and Vaishah standing at the dock. "You are choosing a smaller life," she said. "I'm choosing a clearer one," Silas replied. "Turns out I like knowing what I'm responsible for." She studied him for a long moment. "I will miss correcting you." He smiled. "You're welcome to visit and continue." The transport departed, carrying him toward a civilian repair station on the edge of shared space. The work was familiar. Engines with personalities, systems that failed honestly. He found that he listened more now, not just to machines, but to people. He asked for help. He set boundaries. He stopped apologizing for existing in the wrong category. Sometimes, late in the cycle, he would feel a faint hum through the deck plates, a distant echo of ancient technology acknowledging him across the stars. It no longer felt like a summons. It felt like a greeting. Silas would smile, tighten a bolt, and get back to work. He was still a mechanic. He was also proof that history could take an unexpected turn and not collapse under its own weight. That bloodlines could thin and still matter. That bridges didn't have to carry everything at once. And for the first time since he touched the wrong console on the wrong ship, Silas felt something rare and precious settle into place. Not destiny, just belonging.